You spend your whole life thinking the mountains keep their dead. That whatever the ice takes, it keeps. Sealed, silent, gone. But somewhere above you right now, a boot is working its way out of a glacier with a foot still inside it. The laces are intact. The skin is intact. And the person it belonged to has been missing for longer than you've been alive. This is what the warming world is doing. Not just melting the ice, but emptying it, handing the bodies back. Today we're looking at 6, the melting ice returned, and everyone is wrong. Here's the part nobody tells you. When a person dies in the mountains, the ice doesn't preserve them out of mercy. It preserves them because it's efficient. Cold slows the bacteria that would break a body down. Snow buries it before the weather and the birds can get to it. Oxygen can't reach it. And so the thing that should rot instead waits. Skin, hair, fingernails. The clothes someone chose that morning, held at freezer temperature for as long as the glacier holds together. For 100 years, that was a one-way door. The mountains took, and they didn't give anything back. What's changed is the temperature. The glaciers that have kept these people are melting faster than at any point in recorded history. And as they shrink, they're unsealing. And one by one, the bodies inside are coming out. Not as bones scrubbed clean by time. As people. Still dressed, still recognizable, still frozen in the shape of the last thing that happened to them. We'll start with the one you could almost mistake for a fresh accident. In the summer of 2023, 2 hikers were crossing the Thaw Glacier, in the long shadow of the Matterhorn, when one of them saw something dark against the white. It was a boot. Old leather, cracked, still laced, and it wasn't empty. Around it, meltwater had pulled back the ice just enough to expose the rest. Bones, scraps of climbing equipment, the ordinary gear of someone who had gone up a mountain and never come down. The laces were red. That's the detail that stays with people. Whoever tied them did it on an ordinary morning, and then the mountain closed over him for the better part of 40 years. He'd been missing since September 1986, a climber, 38 years old, who simply didn't come back, and whose search at the time turned up nothing at all. The glacier had taken him completely. When it finally gave him up, there wasn't enough of a face left to know him by. So they did it the modern way. A DNA sample, matched to a living relative. A name lifted back onto a person who had spent 37 years as an unexplained hole in someone's family. 37 years is its own kind of sentence for the people left behind. Birthdays and funerals and whole lives lived around someone who never came home and never got a grave. The ice ended that the way nothing else could have. Not with a search party, but with a thaw. And think about what the glacier was doing in all that time. It didn't just hold him still. Ice flows. Slowly. A frozen river you can't see moving, creeping downhill a few feet a year. And over the decades it carried him, turned him, crushed him, and finally pushed him back out into the sunlight somewhere he never stood while he was alive. The Matterhorn and the glaciers around it have killed hundreds of climbers, and the Alps still list well over 1,000 people simply missing in the ice. He at least died on a mountain he had chosen to be on. The next man didn't choose it, and when the ice was done with him, he didn't look dead at all. This is not a mountain that gives people back gently. In 1970, an earthquake tore a slab of ice and rock loose from Huascaran's summit and sent it down onto the valley below at the speed of a jet, burying 2 entire towns and killing around 20,000 people in a matter of minutes, one of the deadliest avalanches in recorded history. That is, the mountain William Stamfel chose to climb. In 2002, the American went up Huascaran, the highest peak in Peru, with 2 close friends. An avalanche came off the slope and took all 3 of them. The mountain kept them. For 22 years, there was nothing to bury, nothing to visit, just a family back in Chino, California, who knew roughly where he was and knew they would never reach him. Then, in June 2024, another climber working his way up the same route came across a body lying out in the open and stopped, because it did not look like a 22-year-old death. The clothing was still on it, the boots were still laced to the feet. On the left hand, a gold wedding ring. The ice hadn't reduced him to a skeleton. It had mummified him, freeze-dried him, held the shape of the man almost exactly as the avalanche left him, skin drawn tight and dark but unmistakably a face. The climber knelt down, opened the small hip pouch at his waist, and found the answer sitting inside it: a driver's license, a pair of sunglasses, a camera, a voice recorder, 2 $20 bills gone soft with age. The name on the license was William Stamfel. A recovery team of 13, mountain guides and elite police officers, went up in July to bring him down. And one of the officers, a man who had spent years on that mountain, could only say, "I've never seen anything like that." Here's the part that should unsettle you. They found him roughly 3,000 to 4,000 feet below where the avalanche had hit him. He had not waited where he died. For 22 years, the glacier had been carrying him downhill, a slow, patient conveyor moving one man's body toward the daylight. delivering him, in the end, almost exactly to the trail where someone would finally look down and see him. That was chance. The next place the ice is giving up its dead, men were sent there to die on purpose. There is a glacier where two nations have been at war since 1984, higher than any battlefield in human history. The Siachen Glacier, in the Karakoram, sits above 20,000 feet, and India and Pakistan have kept soldiers stationed on it for 4 decades, not fighting each other so much as fighting the mountain, which has always killed far more of them than gunfire has. Men die up there of frostbite, of altitude, of falling into cracks in the ice, of the simple fact that the human body is not built to keep living that high. Neither side can really win a glacier. They just keep sending soldiers up to bunkers on the ice, rotating them through months in the cold and the thin air, some of them never fully recovering, to hold a stretch of frozen ground that kills them for free. In 1984, a young Indian soldier named Chandrasekhar Harbola was on the glacier with 19 others when an avalanche came down and buried the entire party. 15 of the bodies were dug out at the time, 5 were not. They stayed in the ice, at an altitude where a person slowly shuts down just by being present, and the years stacked up on top of them. His wife waited. She had been told, years before, that there was no point, that the glacier does not give anyone back, and she kept a photograph anyway, and a quiet certainty that the war had eaten her husband whole. Then in 2022, 38 years later, an army unit working that same stretch of glacier found him, still where the mountain had pinned him, preserved well enough that they could carry him down and give her, at last, something to bury. And lying beside him they found a second body. That one they could not name. He is one of the last of the 5, someone else's husband or son, and as far as anyone has said, he is still unidentified, a soldier the glacier decided to hold on to a little longer. Modern war leaves its dead in the ice. So did a war so old that almost no one alive remembers it. High in the Italian Dolomites, on a peak called the Marmolada, soldiers fought each other more than a century ago, in what Italians still call the White War. From 1915 to 1918, Italian and Austro-Hungarian troops carved tunnels, barracks, and whole cities of ice into the glaciers themselves, and lived up there in the cold, thousands of feet above the valleys, shelling one another across the snow. To survive the shelling, the Austro-Hungarians dug an entire warren of tunnels, dormitories, and storerooms straight into the Marmolada Glacier and lived inside the mountain. Soldiers called it the City of Ice. The same ice they hid in is the ice handing them back now. And the mountain killed most of them anyway. Avalanches came down constantly, some triggered on purpose by artillery, aimed to bring the snow down on the enemy where he slept. And the soldiers had a name for the ones that swept away 100 men at a time: the White Death. Over a single terrible stretch of December 1916, avalanches are believed to have killed thousands of troops along that front in a matter of days. Many of the dead were never recovered, because you cannot dig a body out of a moving glacier in the middle of a war. So they stayed. And they have been coming back out ever since, as the ice that swallowed them keeps thinning. In August 2024, a hiker on the Marmolada found the remains of 2 soldiers at around 2,700 meters. Not scattered bones, but men the glacier had kept, each still wearing the small metal identity tag around his neck. The tags showed they had belonged to the Como Brigade. 106 years after the last shot, the mountain handed back 2 of its infantry, intact enough to be read off their own dog tags. 2 men who had marched up into the snow as the enemy of half the men beside them, and come back down as a single, anonymous find in a hiker's photograph. And it does this almost every warm summer now. A shell here, a boot there, a face somewhere in the melt. Somewhere in that ice are the rest of them, still waiting their turn. But if you want to understand how many dead a single mountain can hold, you have to go to the one that has become a graveyard. More than 300 people have died trying to climb Mount Everest since the first expeditions in the 1920s, and a great many of them are still up there. Above 26,000 feet, in what climbers call the death zone, the air holds about a third of the oxygen you're breathing right now, and there is simply no strength to spare to carry a corpse down a wall of ice and rock. So the dead stay where they fall, and the living step around them. Bringing one down isn't just hard, it's dangerous enough to kill the person trying. A frozen adult can weigh well over 100 kilograms once the ice has locked around them, and every hour a rescuer spends prying a body loose is an hour spent in the death zone burning oxygen he doesn't have to spare. For most of Everest's history, the math was simple and merciless. The dead stay. That's exactly why so many are still up there to surface. Some have been up there so long they've become landmarks with grim nicknames. A body in bright green boots that marks the mouth of a certain cave. A woman frozen where she sat down and never got up, whom climbers call Sleeping Beauty. For decades, the snow buried most of them. Now it doesn't. The ice is thinning. The old dead are surfacing along the ropes. and in 2024, the Nepali army finally sent a team to start bringing some of them home. It cost more than $500,000 and took soldiers, guides, and porters working together at an altitude that can kill them too. And the ice did not let go easily. A single body took 11 hours to free, the recovery team pouring hot water and swinging axes to chip a man out of the grip the mountain had closed around him. The team was led by an army major named Aditya Karki, who put the cause plainly. "As the snow cover thins," he said, "the bodies and the trash are simply becoming visible again, the mountain uncovering what it used to hide." They brought down a handful of bodies that season, some no more than skeletons in faded climbing suits, along with roughly 12 tons of garbage. Because the highest place any human being has ever stood is now also a frozen dump, packed with the gear and the remains of the people who died reaching it. And the more the snow pulls back, the more of them appear. Which brings us to the last one, because the single most famous body this mountain has ever hidden may have just come back, exactly 100 years late. In 1924, two British climbers walked up toward the summit of Everest and vanished into the cloud. George Mallory and his young partner, a 22-year-old named Andrew Irvine, whom everyone called Sandy. They were trying to become the first human beings ever to stand on top of the world, 29 years before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay officially did it in 1953, and the mountain took them both before anyone could learn whether they'd made it. Mallory's body turned up in 1999, frozen face down high on the slope, 75 years after he fell. Irvine's never appeared. He became the great missing man of mountaineering, and not only because he was lost. Irvine was the one carrying the camera. If someone could find him, and find that camera, the film still inside it might show whether the two of them reached the summit first. Whether the history books have been printing the wrong names for 70 years, there had been hints for decades. In 1975, a Chinese climber said he'd come across the body of an Old English dead high on the north side, at roughly the height Irvine was thought to have come to rest, and then died himself in an avalanche before he could ever lead anyone back to it. Searchers spent years afterward combing that slope, not just for a body, but for the camera the expedition had lent him, a small Kodak folding model, on the theory that its film, frozen all this time, might still be developed. They found nothing. Then in September 2024, a National Geographic team was crossing the central Rongbuk Glacier, low on the mountain's north side, when the filmmaker Jimmy Chin noticed an old leather boot melting out of the ice, with a foot still frozen inside it. He lifted the sock away from the ankle and stitched into a faded red label were the letters "A C. Irvine." After 100 years, the ice had returned him. But it returned him in pieces, and it kept the one piece that mattered. The camera wasn't there. His own great-niece, looking at the photographs, said the boot alone seemed to tell the story, that a fall or an avalanche most likely ended it. But the answer to the question Sandy Irvine died chasing is still somewhere on that mountain, sealed in the same ice that just handed back his foot, waiting for a warmer year to let it out. The glacier gave up the man. It's still keeping the secret. Here's the thing to sit with. Almost none of these people were found by anyone searching for them. A hiker glanced down at the wrong rock. A climber knelt beside a body on his way up. A filmmaker happened to cross the right patch of melting glacier on the right afternoon of the right year. These bodies weren't discovered so much as delivered, pushed out into the light by ice that is shrinking a little more every single summer, everywhere on Earth, at the same time. And it is not slowing down. As this was being written, a family in Pakistan was burying a father who had disappeared into a glacier in 1997 and come back out, nearly intact, 28 years later. His body preserved so completely that the people who found him could still make out his face. The Alps, the Andes, the Karakoram, the Himalayas, every one of them is thawing, and every one of them has a century or more of the missing folded into its ice. So the real question isn't how these 6 came back. It's how many are still up there, still frozen at the exact moment they died, still wearing the boots they laced that morning, still holding whatever they were holding, waiting for the summer that finally lets them go. If this is the kind of thing you want to know before everyone else does, stay with us. The ice has barely started giving them back.